So today we're going to have a look at Wildflower Meadow establishment, and behind me is a wildflower I did earlier in the year, and that's really looking good. Let's just take a closer look and have a walk down it. We'll have a look at one area that worked really well and one area that didn't. Take a look at this mix. So we've got some beautiful sort of mallows just in there. You can see some mallows. There's quite a few cornflowers, different colours. So this is bees and butterflies mix. There's a little bit of borage just tucked away here. There's also a little bit of poppies, one or two poppies. Here's you've got the beautiful corn marigold, and you can see that yellow one that's popping up all over the place. We've got the lovely corn chamomile, which is the white one, just like the little sort of feverfew it looks like. And it's worked really well to attract the bees and butterflies. And that was sown in the spring, and that's worked well. But we're going to look at an area that hasn't worked so well. There's a bit of melilot there as well in the foreground. Another area that hasn't worked well, and we'll have a look at why. This area hasn't worked so well, and the reason it hasn't worked so well is because there are dominant weeds. So you can see that we've got this comfrey, brilliant if you want to produce your own potassium fertilizer. You can put that in a hessian bag in a water butt, fill it with leaves, and it'll make you fantastic tomato fertilizer. Quite a lot of the wildflowers have germinated and grown, but you can see that there is a lot of comfrey. So any dominant weeds like comfrey or docks. The other weed in here which I've cut down was this one. This is garlic mustard, and garlic mustard has really taken hold here. It may not look that strong, but that's because it's been cut back, but it was very dominant, so we've got to cut that out as well. Otherwise this would have looked as good as the other area. You can see at the back there where nothing's been sown, loads of docks, loads of comfrey, and they're just going to run wild. So the first tip of wildflowers is you've got to get rid of these dominant weeds. The odd thistle is not a major problem because it looks quite architectural, but really got to get rid of them all if you possibly can. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to cut out for the moment, I'm just going to cut out the comfrey just to show off some of the wildflowers. You can see here there's tons of comfrey to the right. There's artemisia sticking up the top there, but you can see the poppy and the borage and the cornflowers and the matricaria underneath. It looks great. The sort of chamomile look about that, and if we could just eradicate the weeds, then you would have that beautiful annual display all the way up, and you can see the pockets behind. So just by cutting away to see those pockets will improve this tremendously. So one of the things you can do in a wildflower area is to use yellow rattle, Rhinanthus minor. It's normally sown at the rate of 1 gram per square metre, and you sow it in the autumn because it needs a period of cold to break the dormancy. We call it vernalization, and so it helps break the dormancy, and then it flowers sort of late in the spring, and that reduces the vigour of the grasses. One of the big things with wildflowers, of course, is that if the soil is too rich, too high in nitrogen, then what happens then is plants such as nettles and grasses dominate. They need a lot of nitrogen and they will flourish and take over. And what this graph is showing you is the more nitrogen that's applied over time, the grasses get bigger and more successful, and they outcompete the wildflowers. And over time the wildflowers get less and less and less. So one of the big things, of course, with pure wildflower meadows is to reduce the fertility, the nutrient levels of the soil in order to help them flourish and establish much better. And we'll look at a few different techniques you can use to reduce the fertility of the soil. So of course one of the ways we can reduce the fertility of the soil even before we sow is to remove some of the topsoil, and some people actually strip a good chunk of the topsoil. You still need a little bit to enable the wildflowers to germinate. So removing it all isn't necessarily a good thing unless your subsoil is good enough to form a seed bed. But reducing it, that can be good. Another thing you can do is actually to grow plants on the area that like nitrogen. So something like on a big scale would be oilseed rape, but on a smaller scale you could use cabbages or any of the brassicas which require quite high nitrogen content. So that would reduce it, and then you could grow your wildflowers the year after it. Another way of doing it, of course, is if you've got an established area, is to remove the grass clippings or whatever's there, remove the clippings and take them away. And that's what you normally do, of course, on an established wildflower meadow, is after they've flowered, you cut them and then they die down and they set seed, leave it a few weeks, and then you gather it up as if you were creating hay in a way. So the seeds drop down into the base, and then they've multiplied. The sowing rates for wildflowers are generally 1 to 2 grams per square meter. So you don't need any more if you're just sowing wildflowers on their own. If you're sowing them with grass, which typically you might be using Yorkshire fog, you might be using fescues to carry the wildflowers, and you'll be sowing that at maybe 3 to 5 grams per meter squared to establish that. And once it starts to grow, what you do is you normally cut it back to about 7 centimeters, no later than April, because then you're going to let it grow up and the wildflowers to flower. The reason we cut it back is to allow the light into the wildflowers to help them establish better in the first year. After that, of course, we just cut them back after they flowered and remove the clippings. And then on the final slide here, we're just looking at a few different ways of actually cutting the wildflower hay, if you like, after it's flowered. Traditionally we used an Allen scythe, which is a reciprocating mower, which cuts back and forth to cut the grass. You can also use, there are modern equivalents of that. If you've got a large area, you might use a tractor mounted machine with a reciprocating bar which cuts the grass behind it, and then you can use it for hay. You can stack it up, dry it out and bale it up for hay. Another way of doing it, of course, is a lot of these sort of hedge cutting machines have a little extension bar, and you just set it at an angle and you go up and down like that for a small area. So that can work quite well as well. Just be careful with that one, you don't get it caught, and make sure you've got your steel toe caps on, because that could be quite dangerous. So I hope that's given you a few ideas on what to do with wildflowers. So normally when we sow wildflowers, what we do, the key thing is remove all the perennial weeds, get rid of them, and if you've cultivated the area, we normally do that with a rotavator 5 to 10 centimeters deep, rake it out with a hay rake which has been cut down, and you get a nice, really good finish then. You might want to heel and toe it if the ground is a little bit soft, just to make sure you haven't got any hollows. And then you rake it again, and then you sow into that. And then once you've sown it, you just pass the rake over it one more time to rake in the seed. Obviously you're going to do your research, test the soil to make sure you know whether it's acid, limey, is it shady, you know, which mix is going to work well for you. Do you want an annual bright coloured mix? Do you want a spring mix with things like primroses and cowslips and things like that? Or do you need a shady mix where you might have maybe some forget-me-nots, some foxgloves in the mix, so you could change the mix around quite a bit. You may even want to use meadow turf, meadow mat. They do a whole range of things now, a lot of companies, where you can roll it out in a mat. Obviously it's going to be more expensive doing it that way. And of course you can buy plugs to plug them in to the ground. So there's lots of different ways, but in this one we looked at as if you were sowing them direct into cultivated soil. So I hope that's been useful, and I hope you got something out of it and you get a good display next year and the years after. See you next time. Generous amount of yellow rattler. You can see the flower heads will definitely give you that diversity whether it be knapweed, scabious, a good amount of oxeye daisies and centurias. So you got nice scabious running through here and looking good. So in this one we've got a bit of south-heel Prunella vulgaris, this little purple one in the bottom of here, the Gracia's Yorkshire Fog, Holcus lanatus. And in this little area we've got some Dactylorhiza, some little orchids growing. So you've got the Prunella, you've got the Dactylorhiza, and a nice bit of Yorkshire Fog just to complement it. And then in the background you've got the hazel. So here's another sort of annual border. You can see that we've got the cornflower. There's a beautiful corn cockle there, Agrostema Githargo. We've even got a few marigolds and poppies in there, but it makes a nice sort of display in this area.